All right. So, this story has been very big among civil libertarians. Taibbi has been reporting quite a lot on this, probably more than anybody else. Uh, the Supreme Court tosses out claim Biden administration coerced social media companies to remove content. So this case was brought in Missouri,
Yeah, Missouri v. Biden. Yep.
where originally a judge, and this really centers around the Twitter files and what was revealed of the contacts the government was having with these tech companies. And originally, a judge actually made the obvious comparison in his decision to the mafia. The mafia doesn't have to explicitly tell you they're going to break your legs. It's implicit in the contact when you have government actors who have the power to regulate your industry saying, hey, look, it's up to you. You want to take down this post?
Right.
It would probably be a good thing. You don't have to explicitly say, otherwise maybe you don't have a store tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And it's implied, but the Supreme Court unfortunately did not see it that way.
They're such squares.
The Supreme Court on Wednesday threw out claims that the Biden administration unlawfully coerced social media companies into removing contentious content. In reaching its conclusion, the court overturned an injunction that would have limited contacts between government officials and social media companies on a wide range of issues if allowed to go into effect. The Supreme Court had previously put the injunction on hold. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre welcomed the ruling, saying it will help the administration, quote, continue our important work with technology companies to protect the safety and security of the American people after years of Republican attacks on public officials who engaged in critical work to keep Americans safe. This woman is a one-person ad campaign for the Republican Party.
Yes.
The court, on a 6-3 vote, found that plaintiffs did not have standing to sue, in part because they had failed to adequately allege that the content moderation at issue was as a result of government actions. Writing for the majority, conservative Justice Amy Coney Barrett said the plaintiffs, Republican attorneys general in Louisiana and Missouri, along with 5 social media users, had failed to show they had suffered harm at the hands of specific government officials. She noted that social media platforms routinely moderated content even before the alleged coercion happened. Quote, in fact, the platforms acting independently had strengthened their pre-existing content moderation policies before the government defendants got involved, she added.
Okay, can I pause there? I mean, talk about missing the point. Talk about missing the entire point. If they're moderating their content, that means they don't need the government to moderate the content. So what is the government getting involved for? The government getting involved is inherently coercive. Now, we covered this because they signaled they were going to rule this way a few months ago, so we talked a little bit about this. You want to make the case that they're making that government contact is not, by definition, in all cases, coercive. You can make that as a theoretical argument. There could be situations where the government innocently says, hey, keep an eye out for this, that, whatever. Something's going on. Keep your eyes open. Could that happen in theory? Sure. Is that how they have acted in these past few years? No. So like I said, it's not that I don't understand this ruling. I do understand where they are coming from. But where they are coming from is a place that exists only in theory. Like if you have any prudence about you, don't you see what's actually going on? Don't you actually see what the actual like physical implications of this are? Or are you just so stuck in your textbook that you're not willing to take a look around and see what's happening?
I do see where they're coming from in the sense that I think a ruling where they threw it out on the grounds that the plaintiffs didn't have standing without setting the dangerous precedent they set by actually offering an opinion about government contacts of this nature, I think would have been in bounds. This is a dangerous decision.
Right.
While the evidence shows government officials played a role in moderation choices, well, there you go. I mean, and this is really the crux of it. Barrett wrote that's not enough to justify a sweeping injunction. I would argue, yes, it is.
Right.
Yes, it is. That is extremely dangerous to the underpinnings of freedom of speech and freedom of the press.
Right.
Not that they have demonstrated a real interest in exercising it, but we'd like the right there for anyone who decides to pick it up.
Especially since one sentence ago in this article, it says that the social media companies were moderating themselves without the government. Okay, so then what business is it of the government if they're capable of doing this on their own? Which there's no reason they wouldn't be. But if you're admitting they're capable of doing this on their own, what is the role of the government, whose only standard are, absent an emergency, are First Amendment standards? Now, an emergency could be whatever they say it is, as we know.
Right. And we saw that during the period in question that the Twitter files really covered, that are the main evidence in this case, the government suppressed correct information like the lab leak.
Right.
So it is not as if you're talking about the government is saying, don't tell people to drink bleach.
Right. And the Hunter Biden laptop. I mean, that was chapter 1 of
the
those
Hunter Biden laptop.
Yep.
Like this demonstrates what the danger of that is. Now, I don't know if they brought those things as evidence in the case, the Hunter Biden laptop and such. But this decision allows them to, what if there's another pandemic, as they're telegraphing,
right?
with the bird flu. We saw that a lot of speech they suppressed turned out to be correct. That's exactly why we have freedom of speech. It is assumed you can't trust the government to regulate truth.
Right.
That's central to our whole governing philosophy as a society.
Exactly.
The plaintiffs also failed to show that previous examples of content moderation could be linked to the communications government officials had with the platform, she added. The states, for example, alleged that a Louisiana state representative's Facebook post about the COVID-19 vaccine was restricted because of government intervention, but Barrett said there was, quote, no evidence to support the state's allegation.
That is a fuck up on the plaintiff's side, assuming that reporting is accurate, because you can't point to every piece of content moderation as being somehow coerced by the government. Of course, Facebook is going to take it upon itself to regulate speech around COVID. We knew that the second the pandemic hit, just like they did on January 6th. What, the government didn't send them a memo on January 6th saying kick everyone off who doesn't think this was insurrection. They knew to do that by themselves, right? And same thing with COVID. Of course, there was going to be moderation independent of the government, but that's neither here nor there. The question is, what is the government doing sticking its nose in? If it's not needed, why is it there?
Well, that's like saying, Hollywood didn't do any movies sympathetic to communism during the Red Scare.
Right.
So that's evidence the government didn't pressure them not to represent that viewpoint in a positive light. Justice Samuel Alito wrote a sharp dissent joined by two other conservatives, Justice Clarence Thomas and Justice Neil Gorsuch. Alito suggested the dispute was, quote, one of the most important free speech cases to reach this court in years, saying the government actions were blatantly unconstitutional. Dogs and cats living together, man. When Alito is the reasonable person in the room. The majority permits the successful campaign of coercion in this case to stand as an attractive model for future officials who want to control what the people say, hear, and think, he added. That the coercion was more subtle than other examples made it even more dangerous, Alito said. Janine Younes, a lawyer at the New Civil Liberties Alliance who represents the individual plaintiffs, said that the court had, quote, green-lighted the government's unprecedented censorship regime, unquote. Her clients include doctors who questioned COVID-19 policies and Jim Hoft, founder of the Gateway Pundit, a right-wing news site. Hoft had claimed that posts about a notorious laptop owned by Hunter Biden, President Joe Biden's son, were suppressed. All right, so there you go. But Barrett wrote in Wednesday's ruling that there was no evidence to show that content moderation decisions could be traced to the FBI or the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, as he claimed. Barrett pointed out that Hoft cited an allegedly censored post written by his brother, not one he wrote himself, which was another reason why he could not show harm. And that is a fuck up from the lawyers.
Right.
Like you should know that you can't demonstrate harm to him because his brother's post was bad.
It sounds like the people bringing this case were kind of fucking incompetent.
A little bit.
Yeah.
Alito focused on another plaintiff, health activist Jill Hines, who Barrett agreed had the best argument for standing. Hines was subject to content moderation by Facebook over posts she wrote questioning pandemic health guidance, including the use of vaccines, at a time the government was communicating with social media companies on the spread of misinformation. She also reposted content from vaccine skeptic and independent presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Alito wrote that it is...
God.
Well, that's a cardinal sin. Alito wrote that it is, quote, reasonable to infer that the efforts of the federal officials affected at least some of Facebook's decisions to censor Hines. The case is one of two that the justices decided this term on the practice known as jawboning, in which the government leans on private parties to do what it wants, sometimes with the implicit threat of adverse consequences if demands are not met. Exactly. How is that not unconstitutional? Clearly. Alex Abdo, litigation director of the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, which has raised concerns about the dangers of jawboning, said the court missed an opportunity to clarify the law on the issue. Quote, the platforms are attractive targets for official pressure, and so it's crucial that the Supreme Court clarify the line between permissible attempts to persuade and impermissible attempts to coerce, he said. This guidance would have been especially valuable in the months leading up to the election. So this is part of what's so dangerous about this, and this kind of goes back to some of what we discussed in the Tucker segment. You have a shift from the legacy media, which is well protected by a lot of established precedents, court decisions regarding freedom of the press and government coercion. And then you have this new tech where journalism, real journalism, is increasingly the only place where it's being platformed, and they are not giving them the protections that historically were given to print journalism. So you're going to wind up with the platforms where journalism is actually occurring now, not having the protections of the old legacy media where journalism has long since fled their hallowed halls and they've simply become disseminators of propaganda. They have protections that they don't need because they don't do journalism at this point.
Right, exactly. They'll never run up against it in that way.
Right.
Please clap.